Today is Monday, April 12th, and it is 4:08 p.m. and I am here with Wes at the Geneva United Methodist Church. Thank you so much for interviewing with us today. Please state your full name, your role as a student at the consolidated school that you went to, and then what years you attended that school.
Okay, my name's Wes Malcom. I attended Hansell Community School, and then in 1960, Hampton Community and Hansell Community joined, and I didn't change schools. Actually, even though I was in 7th grade, Hampton came out to Hansell. So my transition was pretty easy. I didn't even change schools. I just stayed in the same school. But my transition in this consolidation was pretty easy anyway, because I had already changed schools 2 or 3 times already, or 2 times before. So I wasn't really, it didn't bother me that terribly much to have a new school. And this is, like I said, it was 1960 to 61 is when Hampton and Hansell joined. And I guess that's about it on that. It was just, well, one thing I would say, my class at Hansell was about 25 kids. Yeah, I was going into 7th grade, but the 6th grade, when it consolidated, a number of my classmates went to another school, to Sheffield, when they divided up the community. And I kind of missed the kids that I was used to being with, some of them. That was some of my best friends. So that was probably one thing I missed, was my old friends. And that's about it on the consolidation.
Okay, you mentioned that you went to 3 different schools. Which, can you list all the schools that you went to? Okay,
I went part of kindergarten in Des Moines, and then we moved to Hampton, a farm north of Hampton. I went to finish kindergarten, then went 1st, 2nd, and 3rd at Hampton. And then at the end of 3rd grade, I went to Hansell. So I guess it was just counting the consolidation, I'd been 3 schools, but I was used to it. But I did always have a hard time in school. So I'm sure changing schools probably was hard on me in that respect. I do remember really having a hard time.
Would you say that the lessons or the style of teaching changed when you had that shift from consolidation?
No, I don't think the changes, I don't think there was that much. I think it was basically my own problems that were, I guess I just wasn't the best learner, so the teachers were probably about the same quality.
How did student life change during and then after consolidation?
Well, okay, from my standpoint, I had probably became accustomed or used to this smaller school at Hansell. And going in with Hampton was, when I said I got used to it quick, but it was a little bit traumatic, because we went from a class of 25 to a class of probably 100, where I really didn't know too many of the kids. So it was quite a change, but I can't say it was terrible. I knew it was coming, and we expected it, and I just got through it.
Do you have any particular memories from that time period?
Not really. I think my biggest memory is that a number of people around Hansell weren't really happy, because Hansell was a pretty close-knit school, and it was gone, and it was sort of the community. And it was like the community was no longer in existence. It was gone. So people felt more isolated, I think. And I probably felt that a little bit because I heard it a lot, that our community was gone now. And I guess that's the only thing I can remember about that.
How did Hampton and Hansell kids typically interact with each other?
I think pretty successfully. I don't think there was any big issues, no.
So going back to your childhood, when were you born?
Okay, born in November 22nd, 1948 in southern Iowa, Centerville, Iowa. My parents lived in Centerville at the time.
Okay, so what was your family like?
Pretty typical. Dad was a mechanic in Centerville, and he decided wages were too poor down there, so he moved to Des Moines, and he worked as a mechanic in Des Moines. And then he worked at Firestone for a while, and then he decided he was tired of just an 8-hour job, and he always wanted to farm. There was a farm for rent in Hampton, so he just decided that he was going to try farming. So he moved from Des Moines up to Hampton.
Did you have any siblings?
I've got 2 older sisters.
Okay, what are their names?
Okay, Corrine is 2 years older than I am, and then Carol is 6 years older.
So how far away did you live from your school?
Okay, when we moved to Hampton the first time from Des Moines, we were about 10 miles from the school. And then we moved to Hansell, we were only about 2 miles from the school. And then when the schools consolidated, we were about 8 miles away from Hamptons. So it was never, as far as we talk about bus rides, the biggest bus ride I had was when I was really, really young, when we lived north of Hampton. That was probably 45 minute to an hour ride.
Did you always ride the bus to school?
Well, all until I think when I was a senior, I think I finally got a car.
So what were some of your interests as a child?
Okay, as a child, probably, I liked to play with toy tractors when I was a little kid and play farm. And, well, both farms where we lived, there was a big grove. My sister, that's just 2 years older than I am, we played in the grove a lot together. We really didn't have too many neighbor friends. We basically just played together by ourselves. I mean, I remember that still to this day. I had a good time just playing in the grove. We played horses and tree houses, and we made paths to the grove, and it was just, I always had a good time.
So did you like school?
No, I did not. I had a hard time in school.
So when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I always thought about being a farmer, but I didn't know whether Dad just rented a farm. I didn't know whether I'd be able to farm or not. But I always had other ideas, maybe being a mechanic or something like that. So I didn't really know until I got I suppose I was in high school, and then when it sounded like there's a pretty good chance I'd be able to farm. So then I started thinking seriously about farming someday. But unfortunately, the military, there was a draft at the time, and I was afraid of being drafted. So that's a long story. But basically, when I was about 25 years old, I started farming.
When did you get drafted?
Well, I didn't. Okay, when I got out of high school, I actually went to college for 2 years just to kind of get my bearings. And also, unfortunately, I have to be honest, I didn't want to get drafted. So I stayed in college for 2 years. But after that, I ran out of money. There was no way I was going to get drafted. So then I went ahead and just joined the service.
Okay. Which branch of the
Okay,
service?
I joined the Air Force.
Were you in which war?
Okay, it was during the Vietnam War, but I wasn't in Vietnam.
Where were you at?
Okay, I was trained in explosives, and I went to Korea.
So going back to school, what is your earliest memory of school?
Okay, my earliest memory goes back to probably Des Moines. I think it was kind of traumatic for me going to school. I didn't really talk very good or anything, according to my sisters. And when I was first in kindergarten, I had quite a time. I suppose I had time communicating.
So what did a typical morning before school look like for you?
Oh, before school? I mean, all through school, even though we lived on a farm, I never really did have to do any chores in the morning. Basically, I just got up, ate breakfast, and got on the school bus.
When you were at school, did you have a uniform or a dress code?
Just shirt and slacks. I mean, no blue jeans. No blue jeans at all.
Did this change at all as you got older?
Nope. I think those dress codes started taking effect within a couple of years. I mean, they dropped the dress codes about a couple of years after I got out of high school.
So when you were at school, can you describe what the school looked like from the outside and then also inside of the classroom?
When I went to Des Moines, that was a brand new school I went to. And then when I went to Hampton, it was a semi-new school for kindergarten. And then when I went to first grade at Hampton, that was the best way to describe it, as my wife described it earlier. It looked like a castle. It was a great big square school, big wooden stairs going up the middle with a balcony. and it was really quite a school. And I went to that to third grade, and then then we moved Hansell, and that was just a typical brick school, 2 stories with a big auditorium. But it was all, at that time I described them as pretty nice schools.
Did your school have any defining features such as a basement, gym, or cafeteria?
Okay, when I went from first to third, there was a lot of defining features in that big castle-like school. It was just, even as a child, I realized that it was a pretty unique school. And when I went to Hansell, it had a really, really, really nice gymnasium that was really big. And that was for a 4th grader, so that this great big gymnasium seemed pretty impressive.
When you arrived at school, how did the day typically start?
Okay, I think school started, I'm going to guess, around 8:45 or so, and got out about 3:30. And it was just a typical school day. I mean, I think we ate about 12 o'clock, went to dinner at 12, and it was just pretty typical.
What did you usually do once you arrived at school? Like, was there any activities, or did your school offer breakfast beforehand, before the classes actually started?
Okay, well, when we went to school, basically, it was just a home, you went to your home room, and I think it was like a 10 minutes. I mean, as far as high school goes, it was probably about 10 minutes, and just went to your regular classes. But as grade school, junior high, it was, again, you always had just one teacher for the whole day, and she set the schedule.
So how many students were in your graduating class?
I think 110 or so.
So how do you remember your classmates?
Just typical people. I don't remember anybody standing out in the crowd, or any real people with issues or problems. Everybody was just really about the same.
So how would your classmates remember you?
Probably wouldn't even remember me. I just kind of fit into I just fit in. I didn't go out for any sports, and I didn't really exceed or excel in anything, so I wouldn't be remembered, no.
What were some of the classes that you took?
As I got older, I focused basically on agriculture. I always went to agriculture class. That would be my main priority class. And with that, I belonged to FFA, and that was a big thing to me. That was my center, my world, I would guess. And the rest of the classes, just basically what was required. I mean, if math was required, or algebra or science, I just took, whatever classes there was. It was just no big deal to me.
And so did you have any least favorite classes, or?
Well, I think they were mostly all least favorite.
So did you ever have any exams or writing assignments?
I think as we got into high school, we got more projects to do. And I still remember doing one on Francisco Franco of Spain. That was I wrote to the embassy, and I got all kinds of information. So that one's always been stuck in my mind. But other than that, nothing, I can't remember anything that really brings to my attention right now, no.
So when you were researching for that project, what all did you have to do to find information?
Well, basically, I went through the encyclopedia. Of course, we didn't have any computers or anything. I went through anything encyclopedias, history books, and I wrote the embassy, and I got all kinds of information on that. And I tried to put it into a form that would be a composition of some kinds, or an essay that seemed to make sense, so in the form of a history, yeah.
So what sort of school supplies did you use?
Well, I think the only thing I can remember is this. At Hansell, they supplied just about everything. Paper, pencils, and I don't remember ink pens until in high school. I think we just had pencils and paper. That's all there was.
Okay. Did you have any music classes when you were a kid?
Again, I can't remember, but it seemed like about in 6th grade, we started having music maybe once a week. And whether it was music, vocal, or studying notes, that kind of, paperwork, that kind of thing, trying to understand how music's written and all that.
Did you have a choice to be in that, or was that required?
I just basically took everything that was required, so it was just required.
So then, were you a part of choir, band?
No,
or no.
no.
Alrighty, yeah. And so, did your school have any physical education or PE classes?
Yep.
Okay.
And same old thing. It was just required. So I think it's maybe once or twice a week, and I don't remember when it started. Probably in 7th grade, for sure. I think, and anyhow, we just it was just pretty simple. But one thing it was boys and girls were separated.
Mm-hmm. And were there any activities or games that you remember playing for that?
Well, one of the dumb ones is dodgeball. Everybody hated it, everybody loved it.
Yeah. Did you like PE overall?
Oh yeah, well, it's good to get away from class.
So did you use the presidential fitness test?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I think we took sort of tests like if we could do calisthenics, but nothing real definite, no.
Did you ever have to run the mile or anything?
Oh, we might have. As a junior or senior, we might have probably did that.
Did your school offer any alternatives to PE?
No, PE was required, and that's all there was.
Okay.
Everybody pretty much fit in. I mean, you really didn't have any choice, and nobody really seemed to put up a fuss.
Yeah.
It was just what it was.
So did your school offer any foreign language classes, or did you take any?
Well, the only thing I remember, I think there was Latin and Spanish was offered, but I didn't take either because they weren't mandatory.
Did you ever take any art classes?
Well, again, I took art classes because they're mandatory, but I always enjoyed art. I mean, that was fun. I like art.
Do you remember any of your creations or anything that you did during that time?
I used to try to draw faces. That's what I tried, but I never succeeded.
Did you ever need to purchase additional art supplies, or did the school provide?
Just school.
Did your school ever offer any special education classes or gifted classes?
No.
And then did your school have a guidance counselor?
I think by high school we did, but I don't think I ever talked to him or her.
Did you have any shop classes, sewing classes, like food, cooking, home
well,
maker?
At that time, again, the girls and the boys were totally divided. Boys just basically had shop and girls had home ec and all that. There wasn't any choices there.
I know you also mentioned that you had some agriculture classes.
Yeah.
Were there any really interesting things that you grew or worked on there?
Yeah, I think it was probably all interesting to me. Whether we studied soils or crops or livestock, it was all. I had an interest. That's one thing I always had an interest in because I grew up on the farm and it was all part of it.
Do you still use the skills that you learned in those classes today?
Ooh, that's hard to say. I think I do.
Okay.
I probably do. I just don't know it.
So did your school offer driver's ed, or was that from a private company?
It was offered through the school. And in fact, I don't think there was any private companies offered it. It was if you wanted driver's ed, you took it through school.
And did you learn any practical or like mechanical uses of a car, or did they just focus on the driving technique?
Basically driving.
And then did your school teach cursive?
Oh yeah, oh definitely. Oh, that was just part of life.
So what were your teachers like?
There was no messing around. They were all pretty disciplined teachers. I do remember in 6th or 7th grade, the teacher, I was sitting in the front row and the teacher had already had trouble with us talking and she was getting tired of it. And she told everybody to be quiet. And I turned around and started talking to somebody behind me. And anyhow, I turned back around, she yelled at me and I just turned back around and she slapped me. That was kind of the discipline we had. But I do remember this, thinking to myself, I sure hope she doesn't tell my folks. See, I wasn't concerned about what she'd done to me. I was concerned that she'd tell the folks because I wasn't behaving myself.
So what did teachers professionally wear to school?
Dresses for the women and slacks and I think shirts and I think even the men even wore ties, I think. It was all dress up. There was never a dress down day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and we didn't know any better. That's what professionals wore. I mean, it's just the way it was.
As a student, what were some of your expectations in class?
Oh, I really didn't have any. I just got through the day.
So when you got to lunch, what was that like?
Oh, I've forgotten. As in grade school, at Hansell anyway, I don't remember Hampton, but in grade school at Hansell, they really had good meals. I really liked them. And then as we got older, I think I got to that teenage attitude that nothing was ever good. Even if it was good, you couldn't admit it.
So did your school offer open campus lunch?
No,
Okay.
no. You just fed what they gave you.
And could you choose to bring your own lunch from home, or was it always home?
Yeah, when we first moved to the farm, I basically took home lunch, just lunch from home because the folks really didn't want to spend the money for lunches. So as they got a little bit more money, and then I always took hot lunch at school. And like I said, at Hansell there was really good meals, and as I got older, Hampton, again, like to repeat myself, it's just teenagers are never happy with their meals. They always complain. So that I just fit into that category.
Do you know, did you have a seating chart, or were you able to just sit with whoever you
Oh, I
wanted?
always had a seating chart. Most of the time anyway. That's the way I remember it. It might not been that way, but that's the way I remember it.
How did you pay for lunch?
Okay, I think we just bought a card and they'd punch out a hole for each day we were there, yeah.
And then when you were in elementary school, what was recess like?
It was just typical, you just went out and played with your friends. I think in later years we played baseball and softball and stuff, but it was pretty much the same old. It was no big deal.
What was some of the equipment on your playground?
Okay, in younger years, we had all that equipment that they've gotten rid of now. It's all this unsafe stuff. But I don't ever remember anybody getting hurt. I mean, we had really, really tall slides, and we had jungle gyms with all kinds of bars that people climbed on and got upside down on, and teeter-totters. But I just don't remember anybody getting hurt on them. I guess they just knew better then.
Did your school also provide any toys for you to play with, like basketballs, footballs, that sort of
Oh
thing?
yeah, there was always basketballs and all that stuff, yeah. Baseballs. I think later years, you had to furnish your own glove for baseball, but that's about all. And then, and of course, like at PE, we had to bring our own clothes. Later years, yeah.
So what games did you personally like to play?
I was never good at anything, so I guess whatever they offered, whatever we played, as far as recess goes, whatever everybody else was doing, I did, yeah.
Did you ever have any indoor recesses?
No. I mean, well, in the wintertime, it was too cold. We went to gymnasium, or to the gym, and shot baskets, or whatever the teachers told us to do, we could do.
Did you have a school nurse at all?
I'm sure there was one always around. Yeah, I'm sure there was always one. My wife says she remembers the school nurse checking out our fingernails and our heads for lice.
When you were in younger grades, like kindergarten, maybe even to first grade, did you ever have a nap time?
Oh yeah, we always had to have a nap.
Did you ever have to bring anything from home?
I think we bought our own little rug to put on the floor.
Then when the school day ended, what happened? Like, what was the typical end of a school day?
Okay, the only thing I can remember is everybody was always happy to get out of school. So basically, when the bell rang, everybody would sit there until the teacher said, you can leave. And once she said go, or he said go, everybody just jumped out of the room, or jumped up, and they went to, in later years we had lockers where we'd get our books, and we'd leave and grab our books from the locker and our coats and go to the bus, or go, if we lived in town, you'd walk. But yeah, it was pretty uneventful. It was just the end of the day.
And how did you get home?
Okay, well, I always rode the bus until I was a senior, and then I bought a car.
And what was expected of you when you got home?
Okay, I think most the years back that I can remember, I was always required to do farm chores, where they feed the calves, do something with the hogs, or I was always required to do some kind of physical work, feed the cattle hay. I always did something like that. So I usually had a half hour of chores every night, No, not a big, not very long, just, but I did it. I had to do it. Yeah.
Did you ever have homework that you took home?
Oh, always had homework. Oh my gosh, we always had homework. Even if I didn't do it, we had homework.
So did you ever have any standardized tests like Iowa Basic Skills?
Well, yes, we had Iowa Basic Skills.
When did you start taking those tests?
Oh, I don't remember. I would say probably 7th or 8th grade.
Would you say your scores were fairly consistent through the years?
Yeah, they were always. I always got fair. I mean, in the middle of the road. Yeah.
Well, how did you feel about these tests?
It was always a big deal. I mean, there's 2 reasons. First, we didn't have to study and do all that stuff. And then the second of all, you knew the teachers wanted you to do as well as you could. So you really had to focus on, because you only had a certain amount of time to do it in, and you had to get it done in that time. So you really had to push yourself.
Did you ever take tests like aptitude tests or tests to determine any future job opportunities at all?
Not that I can remember. I do remember when I decided I was going to go to college, I must have taken something to get me into college, because at that time there were so many kids wanting to go to college. You had to have a fairly average grade in high school, and you also, I think you probably were required to take some kind of test to qualify, but I don't remember any of that, but I must have done it.
Do you think, was it the ACT potentially?
Well, I just don't remember that term back then. They probably had something like that. It might have been that, I just don't remember the term. But there was something required to take a test. Because I do remember I went to Ellsworth, and then I was thinking about going to another college, and I took a test for that. For junior and senior, and I did qualify to get into the school, but then I was running out of money, so I gave up on the idea. Okay. So there must have been tests, but I just don't remember. They could have been ACT tests. I just don't remember the term.
So did your school ever have any like fire drills, tornado drills, or duck and cover drills?
Okay, just the only thing I remember is fire drills.
Okay, and what were those like?
Oh, just fun. Okay. Just everything got disrupted, and by the time you got back to class, everything was so disorganized. You knew there wouldn't be much done for the rest of the class period.
Did you ever have any incidents regarding safety at your school?
Never.
So what was the typical school year schedule like?
Once we got into the classes, in the upper classes where we moved from classroom to classroom, I think from about 7th grade on, we moved from classroom to classroom, and you just got used to it. It was just something you did. It wasn't anything stressful or anything. You just did it.
So did you have any breaks throughout the school year, like summer break, winter break, that sort of thing?
Okay, the only one I really remember is we always had, well, I shouldn't say I do remember them. We always had a couple days off at Thanksgiving, and then we had a pretty long Christmas, and then we always had what we called Easter break. We always had a couple days there then, and those were big deals. I mean, unfortunately, I remember in the upper grades, so it was always something. We were always some kind of project we were supposed to get done over there, especially for Christmas. I just hated because I'd wait until the last minute to do it. But there was always, in the upper grades, there was always a project to do over Christmas.
Do you remember summer break at all?
Well, again, since we lived on a farm, I basically, in the younger years, my sister and I just played in the grove most of the time. And then as I got older, big enough that I could drive a tractor, usually there'd be always a neighbor that needed some kid to drive a tractor out in the field for something, and they'd come over and get me. So basically, I just worked for neighbors, or if Dad didn't need me, I just went to neighbors and worked. And a lot of times, it was really strange back then. They wouldn't necessarily even pay you. They just came and got you, and you worked for the day and never thought about money. You just.
Would you say that your experiences were pretty typical for other students?
I would say on the farm, yeah.
Did your school ever offer any class parties or dances?
Yeah, I think there was always, I mean, in the upper grades from 7th grade or 8th grade on, there was always dances and I won't say parties, but there was dances, and like there'd be an FFA carnival day and kind of things like that, and the other organizations history organizations, they'd have their own little things everybody'd go to.
At your school, did they offer prom and homecoming?
Yes.
Was homecoming a formal event?
Well, I would say pretty formal, but not like it is today. If they bought new clothes, it'd be something they'd be able to wear another day.
So were there any special events at your school that involved the larger community?
I'm sure there was. I can't think of any, but I'm sure at the off season or on Saturdays and stuff, other organizations were allowed to use the school.
Do you ever remember any of those organizations that use the school building itself?
Well, like political meetings and stuff like that, they was always allowed to be there, voting and all that. Yeah.
So do you remember any major local, national, or world events that took place during your school years?
Well, like my wife said earlier, we both remember when President Kennedy was assassinated. That's probably the biggest one we remember. And I think, I'm just trying to think. No, right offhand, I know there is something that I could, because my parents they're well aware of current events. Because Dad was in World War II, and he almost had to go back in the service for the Korean War. So he was pretty much always was a current events person. He knew what was going on in the world. And it's just his family is that way anyway.
So did you ever have a best or worst day of school?
Some of my worst days when I didn't pass a class or something, that would be a bad day, or pass a big important test. And a good day is if I did good. That's my best examples.
What are some important takeaways you want people to remember from your time in school?
Well, I really don't have anything significant other than I think that in my age group, life, you just got through it the best you could. And I can't remember, this idea of looking out for everybody and all this stuff. It didn't really seem to occur to us, but we just kind of looked out for ourselves, and everybody seemed to take care of themselves, and we got through life pretty well. I mean, there was always a few ornery kids that you always wish you could do something with them, but you couldn't do anything with them. But yeah, I got through school with no tragedies or nothing, no events that were really, really extra special, no.
What are some comparisons or contrasts that you can think of your personal experiences at school versus how school is today?
Well, I'm a little bit biased because a lot of my family members are school teachers. And they said school today is different. They said you can't even compare how you went to school because everything is different, and particularly, and I say I'm probably biased on this, but discipline is always an issue. And how if you say the wrong little word to Tommy, he's going to go home and tell his parents that you picked on him and all this stuff. So I think kids back then were a little tougher. They expected a little bit of roughness, and they got through. In the day, teachers have to be tiptoe a lot more to get through the day without hurting somebody's feelings or that kind of thing. So I think back then the kids were just knew to follow the orders and be quiet.
So is there anything else that you wanted to talk about that maybe we haven't gotten to yet?
Well, about the only thing we talked about, we just discussed briefly before the interview started, was back at the time Hampton and Hansell consolidated. That was a period of time in Iowa where a lot of school systems were losing so many students, and they decided something drastically had to be done, and they were forcing a lot of schools to join each other and to merge. And I think Hansell was like kind of a set little community, and they just didn't want to join with a bigger school. And it did, at the least at the Hansell level, it left a lot of people kind of angry for a long time. There was that, and of course, being just a student, I didn't know any of that, but I mean, I didn't feel that way, but the parents did, because it was an important part. The school was the community, and once the school was gone, the community was gone. And And that's the only thing I could add to this. Yeah.
Okay.
And unfortunately, it's the way it had to be, because sooner or later they were going to have to merge, because the farmers, there were so many fewer farmers all the time. There's so many fewer children that there wasn't going to be enough children to run a school successfully. Yeah. Okay. So that's about it.
Thank you so much for interviewing with me today. Really appreciate it.